welcome back to another episode of your English Plus. This is Sergi. In this video, we will be talking about the linking verbs. So, if you look at these two sentences, what is the difference in terms of the verbs that are being used? Well, if you look at the second one, milk, this one has a direct object. So, milk, whom, or what? And the answer is cows. And cows is the direct object, which means that milk is a transitive verb. So, a lot of verbs are either transitive or intransitive. They have a direct object or they don't. But there's also different kind of verb, and that's our first example here, which is a linking verb. So, a linking verb is a verb that seems to have a kind of object, but it's not really a direct object. What comes afterwards, and you can see that here, is something that describes the subject. So if we look earlier, we have I is the subject, and then we got our linking verb, and then whatever comes afterwards describes the subject. So you can think of a linking verb as a kind of big equals sign. It has a similar functions as an equals. I equals a farmer. And you couldn't say that with the second one. You couldn't say I equals cow. That wouldn't make much sense. So linking verbs then allow you to describe the subject, and they do it in a number of different ways. So first of all, let's actually just make a list of some common linking verbs here, and linking verbs tend to follow into a number of different categories. So first of all, one category is the verb to be, and we can come up of a number of examples here. So the verb to be could be things like I am, she is, we are, I was, and so on. The second category consists of verbs that have to do with states of being. We'll just list a few of this here. If I say I become, you can see that it's still kind of equals sign, but in this case we're talking about a process, a state of change in this case, but there's still that kind of equation going on. You can have ones like I appear, I grow, I turn. If you say something like she turned rather sour, right? And sour is describing she. You can say also things like seem, and this is slightly bigger category perhaps than to be in terms of the range of verbs that fit into it. Our third category and our last one here has something to do with senses. So there also allow us, or this also allows us to describe the subject in different ways. And this include ones like feel, look, and smell, and sound, and taste. And again, there's a kind of equals sign here. If you say it tastes great, then it is being described again by great, whatever it may be. Let's look at a few more examples and see how this work in practice. So let's write it is time. There's our first example, and then we'll add one more here. And we're going to write these flowers smell great. Okay, we've got two sentences here. You can see what the linking verbs are. So we have is and we have smell. Now, the next thing we want to learn is that there are some names that we use to describe what comes after the linking verb. So the last little bit here, time and grade, this part of the sentence that describes the subject. This is called the subject complement. And we don't mean the kind of compliment with an I where you try to flatter somebody and you say, well, you look nice today. It's not like that. This kind of compliment is a word complement that means to add something to something else, to contribute something extra, to go well with, let's say. So a subject complement then is something that comes after linking verb and describes the subject in a little bit more detail. There are two kinds of subject complements, broadly speaking. So on the one hand, you have a noun, sometimes a pronoun, and the other kind of subject complement is an adjective. So every subject complement that comes after linking verb is going to be one of these two options. Now we have some fancy names to describe these two nouns or these two options. So if it's a noun, then it could be called a predicative or predicate nominative. Again, it's predicate nominative, very fancy term, or a predicate noun. It's essentially the same thing, but you're going to come across either one of these two descriptions. And we'll tell you in a second why it's called predicate nominative. The other one here, if it's an adjective, it is sometimes called a predicate adjective. So those are some terms that you might come across. Again, whatever comes afterwards is called subject complement. If it's a noun or pronoun, especially if it's a noun, it's called a predicate nominative, and if it's adjective, it's called a predicate adjective. But why is it called like this? Well, the predicate is, of course, everything that describes the subject. So that makes kind of sense. And then the word nominative comes from Latin. In Latin, this has something to do with nomen or name. And the nominative is always the subject of the sentence. So if noun is in the nominative case, then it's the subject. The idea here then is that this bit that follows afterwards, let's say it's a noun, should agree with whatever comes before. Yeah, it should agree with comes before. And you can see that in a strange rule of grammar. So let's say that I were to say it is I know that sounds kind of weird. Most of us would say it is me or it's me. But let's say I said it is I. Well, the reason why grammatically it should be I is because I would be the subject. If you say it is I has to agree with the subject in terms of form. And as a result, it's in the subject form. It's the nominative form. I know that's a really weird rule of grammar. Most of us would probably break that one, but I sort of makes sense. It sort of makes sense of why we call this the predicate nominative. One final point to make, and that's the fact that a linking verb, as it's the first case, can also sometimes be different kind of verbs. So if you look at the last example here, she smelled the flowers. The flowers is a direct object, and that means that smelled in the second instance is a transitive verb. So be careful and don't assume right away that when you see a particular verb, it has to be linking verb or transitive verb or intransitive verb. There's a lot of flexibility there. And in fact, one category, the category to be, which we looked at, these verbs can also be helping verbs. And we'll talk about that in a different episode. So everything depends on context as usual, but as you do more of these kinds of analyzing, you'll get much better at spotting what kind of verb you're dealing with. So that's all for this episode. This has been Sergi, and I'll see you on the next episodes.